Hello and welcome to Storytime with Mr. Laws. Today we're reading Fintan Fedora, The World's Worst Explorer by Clive Goddard. Chapter 27. "Think, you idiots!" yelled a red-faced Max Wrench at his cowering security guards. "Did you see anyone come in this camp? Did you see a kid?" The two guards shook their heads guiltily and looked terrified. "No, sir, Mr. Wrench, sir," they each stammered in turn. "We definitely didn't see anyone." "You're sure? You're completely sure?" continued Wrench, looking as if he were about to explode in a similar way to the fuel tank. They nodded adamantly. Wrench knew it was Fintan, though. It had to have been Fintan. Why else would his entire operation suddenly disappear in a ball of fire in a soaking wet jungle? It was sabotage, all right. Mind you, even Wrench found himself a little shocked by the depths the kid seemed prepared to stoop to. He just destroyed every single chocoplum in the world rather than let his rivals have them. That was pretty ruthless. With an attitude like that, he could have a glittering career ahead of him at Gigantifoods International. Talking of Gigantifoods, the satellite phone's red channel rang. There was no more avoiding it. It was time to explain the night's rather tricky developments to Randall. Dreading what he was about to hear, Wrench answered the call. "What was all that noise?" demanded a furious-sounded Randall T. Buckmeister. "What's going on down there?"
Listen, Randall. Things aren't too good at the moment," began Wrench. "We've had a bit of a setback."
"A setback?" screamed Buckmeister. "That sounded like more than just a setback to me, Wrench. It sounded like some kind of war going on. Just tell me one thing, okay? Tell me you have the chocoplums safe."
"Well, not exactly," ventured Wrench,
steeling himself for the expected volley of insults.
"Not exactly? Well, you either have them or you don't," bellowed Randall. "Now you listen to me, Mr. So-called jungle explorer. I've had it with your excuses. This is the real jungle right here, the business jungle. Do you understand? I've got a multi-million-dollar advertising campaign bought and paid for. Newspapers, magazines, internet, radio, TV, you name it. I've got the press calling me all the time wanting to know the big secret, and I've got nothing to tell them. I've even got people making jokes about me, Wrench. They're accusing me of making the whole thing right up. Tell me you secured those fruits now, Wrench, or you're finished."
A few yards away, Gonzales and the rest of the men sat miserably amid the smoking ruins, pretending they weren't listening to the conversation. It wasn't sounding good. Their boss had gone from triumph to ruin in less than half an hour, and judging by the look on his face, the news wasn't being received well back in New York. They watched as a stunned-looking Max Wrench dropped the phone to the ground and let out a loud, anguished yell. It was the yell of a highly ambitious, highly paid, highly successful businessman who had just got the sack. He probably wasn't going to be in a very good mood. Seconds later, Wrench came striding towards them, his smoke-blackened face twisted into a terrifying snarl.
"Give me that gun," he hollered, "and that one. In fact, give me all the guns we got left. I'm gonna sort this out right now."
Reluctantly, the security guards handed over their weapons, half expecting their boss to begin shooting everyone in sight, which luckily he didn't. Instead, Wrench slung the heavy rifles over his shoulder and filled his pockets with revolvers and enough ammunition to wipe out a small country. He even snatched up a slightly bent-looking flamethrower, which had somehow survived the disaster, then, without saying another word, headed off to the bottom of the muddy slope. There he switched on his powerful torch, located the burnt petrol trail on the ground, and began following it into the darkness. Happily snoring the night away in his cosy explorer's pajamas, Fintan was dreaming of home. He was dreaming of the hero's welcome he was going to receive when he showed his doubting family the fabulous little brown fruit he'd brought back from the other side of the world. He could see the looks of surprise and admiration on their faces and feel the congratulatory handshakes. They were all gathering around him and his trophy and expressing their amazement at what he could achieve when trusted with an important mission. Gribbly was dreaming of home too. He was lying in a wonderful, hot, bubbly bath with a china cup of speciality tea and a large plate of honey on toast, cut into nice little triangles. Meanwhile, out in the jungle night, a furious bald-headed man with more guns than sense was following the path of burnt undergrowth to their camp. He had lost everything, including all sense of proportion and most of his mind. His torchlight finally fell on a pair of gently swaying hammocks. He grinned a nasty, twisted grin and raised one of his guns. It was time for his ultimate and final revenge. However, immediately above him, in a dark tree, Fintan's best attempt at knot tying was gradually undoing itself. With impeccable timing, the knot finally let go of its heavy load. The oversized iron cooking pot cracked down onto Wrench's unsuspecting head with the force of a charging rhino. Everything went black. Knocked out instantly, he hit the ground and lay sprawled amid the pot's contents, which spilled out onto the forest floor. A variety of hungry little creatures discovered the sudden feast and climbed all over him, attracted by the smell of food. In his deep, blissful sleep, Fintan heard a loud clanging noise, which oddly enough came from a popping champagne cork.
"Congratulations, son," his father was saying. "I'm so proud of you."
When dawn broke in the rainforest, Gribbly was, as usual, the first one awake. He rubbed his eyes, stretched, and remembered that this was the day they were going to begin heading home. Cheered by this happy thought, he clambered down from his hammock and considered making a hearty breakfast. Unfortunately, there was no food left. The lidless cooking pot lay upturned on the ground, surrounded by empty food packets, apparently ripped open and with all the contents eaten. Even more surprisingly, there was a large, smoke-stained, bald-headed man lying flat on his back, covered in guns and animal poo. This, unfortunately, meant breakfast was off.
"Master Fintan, sir," said Gribbly, shaking the sleeping boy awake, "I think perhaps you should see this."
"Oh, 5 more minutes, Gribbs," Fintan mumbled from inside his sleeping bag.
"No, now, please, sir. This is quite important," insisted Gribbly.
When he was eventually persuaded to forego his lion and get up, Fintan was stunned.
"Him again! What on earth's he doing here?"
he said sleepily, not fully understanding what was going on.
"I'm not sure, sir," said Gribbly. "I found him lying there a moment ago. I think he's asleep, or possibly unconscious. He's not dead, though. I checked his pulse."
Fintan surveyed the mess of empty food wrappers.
"Has he been nicking our food? Oh, no, he's been nicking our food, hasn't he?"
"I couldn't say for sure, sir," said Gribbly, "but I'm afraid it's true that we are now completely out of rations."
The shock of this news soon had Fintan wide awake.
"What?" he said, appalled. "No food? Not even breakfast? We'll starve."
In a slightly downbeat mood, Fintan and Gribbly silently packed away all their gear, with the exception of the iron pot, which they no longer had any use for, and prepared for their homeward journey. Without so much as a single cup of tea inside them, they shouldered their packs once again and wondered what to do with their sleeping visitor.
"Leave him there,"
said Fintan grumpily. "I expect he'll wake up with a terrible stomachache after eating all our food. Serves him right too, the greedy devil." Gribbly produced the map and the compass and led the way into the trees. "Seriously though, Gribbs," said a worried-sounding Fintan, "what are we going to eat? We're in big trouble, aren't we?" Gribbly sounded a lot less concerned. "As luck would have it, sir, I once read a particularly useful book on jungle survival techniques. It said we can drink rainwater, which will keep us alive. Food is of less importance than water, but the book also included advice on which insects one can safely eat. Apparently, providing one avoids the hairiest and most brightly coloured insects, the rest are quite safe. Termites, worms, and all manner of bugs are perfectly edible. Grasshoppers are particularly favoured, I believe, once the head, wings, and legs have been removed." Fintan was thoroughly disgusted.
"You know you can read too many books, don't you, Gribbly?" he said, pulling a face.
A moment later, he appeared to remember something important, stopped, dropped his pack, and began rummaging through his wash bag.
However, Gribb's old friend, you'll be pleased to hear that this time it's me that's done something clever. Look, I hid a peanut butter sandwich wrapped up in my flannel in case of emergencies. See, we can cut it into little pieces and ration it. Feeling very proud of himself, Fintan took out his penknife and carefully cut the sandwich into 16 tiny equal squares. These were then reverently wrapped in a page torn from Young Adventurer magazine and placed in one of his little plastic boxes for safekeeping. Gribbly cast an eye over the soggy emergency sandwich. There were a few bits of soap stuck to it, and it was almost completely squashed.
"Indeed, sir," he said flatly. "We're saved." Chapter 28. It was late afternoon by the time Gonzales and a few of the other men found Wrench, and were puzzled as to why he should be lying flat on his back by an empty iron cooking pot. They revived him with a little water, patched up the nasty cut on his head, and escorted him back to the burnt remains of their camp. By the time he was lucid enough to speak, it became clear that Wrench had no idea what had happened either. All he could remember was that he was going on a lovely vacation to Brazil and kept asking where Barbara was. He had no memory at all of the Choco Plum mission or of the explosions which had destroyed it. Everything was a blank. Gonzales decided he should probably take command. He picked up Wrench's satellite phone and called the emergency services to ask for help. It turned out that the local authorities were already extremely busy. Apparently, they were overstretched due to a major manhunt. Most of their resources were tied up looking for the vicious hot dog van thieves. Gonzales decided to mention that among his party was his boss, Senor Wrench, who was seriously injured. Just in case it might help, he added that Senor Wrench was very rich and would be very grateful. It helped. The woman on the phone couldn't write their map coordinates down quickly enough. Within an hour, help was on its way. A huge police rescue helicopter with a paramedic on board was hurriedly dispatched over the jungle, looking for a clearing full of burnt rubble and 22 hopelessly lost men. Gribbly, on the other hand, knew exactly where he was and where he was going. He was going home. Spurred on by this tantalizing prospect, he and Fintan, without the heavy cooking pot, had made good progress. According to the map, they could expect to reach the river before nightfall. Everything was going according to plan for a change. After what they hoped would be a good night's sleep on the riverbank, they planned to take Anna's boat back upstream the following day. Quite how they were going to paddle it against the current was something Gribbly was trying not to think about. It hadn't yet occurred to Fintan. For the rest of the day, they pressed on through the dense forest, putting up with its now familiar hardships. There was the usual stifling heat to deal with, and the added difficulty of having to collect rainwater to drink. There was the humidity, more torrential rain, the mud, and the constant danger of falling branches, which would drop unexpectedly from the canopy above. There was also the awkward moment when Fintan pulled down a springy branch, let it go, and launched a long stripy snake, which wrapped itself around Gribbly's neck like a scarf. But worst of all was the hunger. By evening, Fintan's stomach was making regular gurgling noises loud enough to startle parrots. He had politely declined to try any of the little snacks Gribbly had plucked from the trees and was feeling horribly weak. Not weak enough to eat insects yet, but horribly weak all the same. The relief he felt when they eventually reached the river was enormous. They had even managed to arrive before sunset, which meant they could still see to pitch their camp. "Well done, sir," commended Gribbly, as Fintan dropped his pack and lay in a heap on the ground. "We've done a good day's walking, even though I say so myself." Fintan forced a weary smile, but couldn't muster any conversation. Gribbly had a quick scout around in case he'd confused their location somehow, but he was confident it was the same spot where they had arrived a few days earlier. A large, clear, muddy area with virtually no trees, which meant they could see the sky for a change. There were the same tall pink rocks split by a cascading waterfall, the same merging of rivers, and the same turbulent brown water. The only difference was that the river level had risen considerably, probably because of all the rain, and their boat had gone. This was bad. With an unpleasantly cold feeling of doom growing in his stomach, he frantically double-checked the area and even looked up the trees, but it had definitely gone. floated away in the high water. This wasn't going to be easy news to break.
"What?"
said Fintan, when he eventually realised Gribbly wasn't joking.
"Gone? But how did it... I mean, but... What are we going to do now?"
A painful silence followed. This was a question that neither of them could answer. Die was the only obvious word they could come up with, and neither of them wanted to say it. With heavy legs and even heavier hearts, they tied their hammocks in silence and prepared for the fast-approaching night. Gribbly couldn't even bring himself to gather a crunchy little supper. This was a new low point. They sat side by side on a log for a while and miserably shared a tiny square of soapy peanut butter sandwich. Neither of them spoke, each quietly contemplating the dire new situation they found themselves in. They may have made it to the choco-plum grove and got something to show for it, but their chances of getting home alive had suddenly got a lot slimmer, as had Fintan's stomach, which gurgled in protest at its diminished rations.
"Gribbs," said Fintan after a while, "if we do manage to get out of here, if we get home okay, will you remind me to write a letter to Corentina and Anna? I think I ought to apologise. I mean, we've lost the boat now, as well as the choco-plum grove. They're not going to be very happy with me."
Gribbly managed to force a fairly positive-sounding tone. "Of course, sir. As soon as we're home, I'll remind you to write."
"Thanks, Gribbs, old mate," said Fintan listlessly. "Shame, really. It's all ended up as a bit of a mess, hasn't it? Hardly any food left. No boat. No way home. Still, at least things can't get any worse."
Approximately 4 hours later, things got worse. Fintan, tossing from side to side in restless sleep, began dreaming of food. Irresistibly tempting visions floated before him. Vast mountains of mashed potato with sausages sticking out of them, and floods of ketchup dribbling down the sides. Big bagfuls of fat, greasy chips smelling of vinegar. Slabs of fruit cake as big as house bricks, steaming hot chocolate puddings drowning in gallons of chocolate sauce, whole jars of peanut butter dolloped onto thick, crusty white bread. He was suffering from the dreaded night starvation. Without knowing what he was doing, Fintan began sleep-eating. Just before dawn, he awoke feeling a lot less hungry than when he went to sleep, and with his hand in an empty plastic container.
"Oh, no!" he yelled, startling Gribbly awake. "Oh, no, what have I done?"
As far as Gribbly was concerned, it wasn't such a terrible thing. Fintan had been welcome to the emergency soapy sandwich. It wasn't all that important, really, in the scheme of things. They were probably going to starve anyway. The only thing he found annoying was having to listen to his endless stream of abject apologies.
"Oh, Gribbs, I'm so sorry," wailed Fintan. "Please forgive me. I didn't mean to do it. We were going to share that last sandwich and I ate the lot. I'm so sorry. I couldn't help it. I was asleep. Please forgive me."
Gribbly gritted his teeth. It was possible that he only had a short while left to live, and he didn't really want to spend his last few hours on Earth listening to this irritating racket. "Master Fintan, sir," he said, with uncharacteristic abruptness, "will you kindly shut up, please?" Join me tomorrow for the next chapter.